Bueno, a ver, la abogada de Jhonny Depp le dice una verdad incómoda a Amber Heard y al jurado. La abogada de Jhonny Depp le dice una verdad incómoda a Amber Heard y al jurado. Por aquí lo tenemos. Voy a quitarme del medio, ¿no? En plan, ya puedo. Ya puedo ponerme por aquí. Vamos a ver qué tal. Lo que más me gusta es que está esto subtitulado bien. Le hizo una verdad incómoda a Amber y al jurado. Veremos, tío. Buah, es que puede. Es que se puede liar, ¿eh? Se puede liar mucho, tío. Entérico. Ahí vamos. Vámonos. Aquí empieza la salsa. Buenos días. Empieza el salsuñi.
Over the course of this trial, you're going to have an opportunity to get to know Jhonny Depp. Not the characters he's portrayed, but the man himself. You will hear from Mr. Depp directly, but you will also hear from his friends, his family, and employees. You will hear from people who have known him for decades. They have seen him at his best, and they have seen him at his worst. And they will tell you, each of them, that he is a kind soul who has never and would never raise a hand to a woman. You will hear that Mr. Depp learned at a very young age how to coexist with an abusive woman.
¿Cómo
You
coexistir
will
con una
learn
mujer
from Mr.
abusiva?
Depp's sister, Christy, and from Mr. Depp that their mother, Betty Sue, lived in a constant state of anger that would boil over daily in vicious words and violence directed at her husband and their children. And you will hear how Mr. Depp, who had the personality of his father, coped with that abuse in the same way his father did. He just took it. The evidence will show that Mr. Depp learned that the best way to deal with violence was to leave, to get away from it. Give her time to cool down. But he never turned his back on his mother. Mr. Depp loved his mother, and he cared for her until the day she died. You will hear how Mr. Depp came to Los Angeles as a teenager. He first claimed to be a musician, then became an actor, and eventually, thanks to his talent, his dedication, and a lot of hard work, grew into one of the biggest movie stars in the world. He had relationships with major figures in Hollywood and elsewhere, like Winona Ryder, Kate Moss. And before he met Amber Heard, he was with the same woman, Vanessa Paradis, for 14 years. He had 2 children with her. And even though he was a megastar, they had a quiet, domestic life. In fact, you'll hear, as Mr. Chu already told you, that in Mr. Depp's 58 years, not a single woman has ever accused him of violence. And nobody in
Buah,
Hollywood or
totalmente está limpiando la imagen, pero muy bien. Está muy bien. O sea, es que te lo juro que veo el trabajo de este tipo de abogado o abogada y es que en plan, es increíble, real, ¿eh?
the world had any reason to believe he was an abuser until Miss Heard publicly accused him in 2016. You're also going to hear evidence about Miss Heard. You're going to learn that she's a profoundly troubled person who manipulates the people around her just like she manipulated Mr. Depp. Miss Heard came to Los Angeles and sought a career in acting after Mr. Depp was well established as a movie star. Mr. Depp and Miss Heard first met in 2009 on the set of the film The Rum Diaries. There was a significant age difference.
Toda la
between
historia,
them.
literal, ¿eh?
And at first, he avoided her advances, but she pursued him. She wooed him. The evidence will show that Miss Heard went to great lengths to win him over by playing the doting girlfriend. And it worked. He fell head over heels in love with her. Those who watched this relationship develop saw red flags all over the place. You will hear from them in this trial. And over time, the real Miss Heard began to emerge. She would berate him, scream at him. He would try to appease her, and sometimes, just sometimes, things would get better. But it would always happen again. The evidence will show that Mr. Depp started coping with Miss Heard in the same way he did as a child. He would try to get away, avoid the conflict. But his trying to leave enraged Miss Heard. She would resort to physical...
Qué locura, tío. Es que realmente fue... Es que... Le demandó Jhonny a Amber por violencia. O sea, es que... Imaginaos la locura, ¿eh? No sé, tío.
Throwing things at him. Hitting him. She would tell him he was a coward. She would tell him he wasn't man enough because he wouldn't stay and fight with her.
Whoa.
You will see that Miss Heard equated anger and violence with passion. She would apologize with poetic excuses, as if the violence just proved how fierce and overwhelming her love for him was. And you're going to hear that when Miss Heard got violent, Mr. Depp would just retreat, just as he did with his mother. He would try to leave, to get away from her.
Una realidad,
In her words, Miss Heard's words, he would split. Mr. Depp would often retreat into bathrooms, lock the doors, wait out Miss Heard's aggression. But his leaving just provoked her more. You will hear from Mr. Depp's security people, like Sean Bett, about how they often had to remove Mr. Depp from scenes with Miss Heard, screaming at him, chasing him, trying to keep him from leaving. You're going to hear evidence that when Mr. Depp and Miss Heard traveled together, his team routinely had to book an extra room for him so that he had somewhere to go when Miss Heard became enraged. You'll hear from other witnesses, including Mr. Depp and Miss Heard's marriage counselor. Her name is Dr. Laurel Anderson.
Esto es literalmente como que cuenta la historia de cada uno de ellos, ¿no? Como para, aparte de limpiar la imagen, como para que se conozca también mejor, ¿no? O sea, creo que la idea es como que cada uno, o sea, cada abogado de ambos, digamos que cuenta la historia de tal manera que tira un poco más para esa persona, o sea.
Miss Heard as the aggressor in the relationship. Miss Heard as the aggressor in the relationship. The one who would strike Mr. Depp to try to keep him from leaving.
Sí, unos opening statements, sí,
You'll hear
total.
from medical professionals who were with Mr. Depp and Miss Heard, often on a daily basis, for years, including their doctor, David Kipper, and Miss Heard's personal nurse, her personal assigned nurse, Erin Barem Falati, who did not see any signs of injuries that Miss Heard later testified to in graphic detail.
Wow.
Miss Heard wants you to ignore the testimony of these medical professionals who saw her in real time, just as she wants you to ignore the testimony of the police officers who testified under oath, who saw her on May 21st, 2016, without any injuries. But it is up to you, ladies and gentlemen of this jury, to judge the credibility of these witnesses and that of Miss Heard.
Buah, vaya primera limpiada, ¿eh? Vaya primera limpiada, tío. O sea, me ha parecido... Es que lo hacen muy bien, te lo juro que cuando tú ves realmente el trabajo de un abogado, una abogada, es que no... O sea, es con esto con lo que más me estoy dando cuenta realmente. También como que me está sirviendo. Así que bueno, amigos, poquito más que decir por aquí. Espero que os haya molado este vídeo. Nos vemos.